she was very brave to wear white pants and a light yellow t-shirt to the muddy cemetery on a rainy day. She started jerking her right knee forward at an odd angle. After a few times, she turns around and yells, "Stop kicking me, shit." My boyfriend and I look at each other and at the other couple standing beside and slightly in front of us. None of us were anywhere near her. Now, this girl was pretty intoxicated, so while I was already freaked out, I was prepared to disregard her, until the last kick. I was watching her leg and clear as day, she bent her knee forward and gasped and I saw a muddy footprint appear on the back of her pants. They were bright white and we all confirmed after the fact, it was a footprint. We could distinguish toes. At this point, I grabbed onto my boyfriend for dear life and held on until the guide was done talking. As soon as she was done, the other couple joined us in running out of that crypt. We all chatted with our tour guide and a couple of her co-workers for a while. She told us that our experience is pretty standard there. She wasn't acting when she warned us. I tell this same story every time the question is asked. So here it goes. Woke up to get a glass of water at night, passed my dad on the way to the kitchen. I asked him something about where was he going. He walked right past me, like he didn't see or even hear me, just was in a type of trance, and he walked out the front door. I looked out the front window, and he was sitting on our sidewalk under a tree, hands on his knees staring into the dark. I went to my mom's room to ask her what dad was doing. She said, "What do you mean? He's right here?" She scooted over, as there was my dad, laying in bed asleep. I was staying with a friend in a remote house in Scotland. In the midnight, I woke up to go to the toilet and suddenly it was very, very cold and I heard someone complain they always make this room dirty. Always, and I'm cleaning all the time and still it was dirty. It was so cold for a moment and then it was over. The next morning, I told the house owner that last night it suddenly was very cold in the bedroom when I went to the toilet and before I could say anything else, he asked immediately, "WHO, have you seen?" That WHO part sent shivers down my spine. Not what happened? But WHO, have you seen? Later, he told me his daughter and son-in-law had lived in that very room and the son-in-law had died in an accident. He loved to keep the room spotless. Even typing this still sent shivers down my spine. Our last house had a ghost cat. We have two live cats, a black one who is old and can't jump on anything higher than the couch, and a crazy white cat. I'd often be working around the house and see our black cat at my feet, reach down to pet him and he wasn't there. After a quick search I'd find him in an entirely different part of the house having a snooze. For the longest time, I just assumed it was my eyes playing tricks on me. Then one time I was in the kitchen sink, doing dishes, and in my peripheral vision, I see our black cat jump up onto the counter beside me. I even heard him landed on the countertop and felt a bump on my arm as he headbutted. He hadn't been able to jump that high in a couple years, so of course I turned to fully look at him and nothing. No cat, empty counter. I was in a motorcycle accident a few months back. I broke my spine and needed surgery to heal several ribs. As they brought me into the surgery, I noticed two men standing in the corner of the door looking not at all surgically clean and entirely out of place. Looking back at it, I later recognized them as my two late grandfathers, one of whom died in the hospital, the other died during a surgery. The reason I know that was my grandfather is because my parents told me a story about how they were in the hospital's food court during my 11-hour surgery, and my dad heard his father telling him that everything was going to turn out alright. He told my mom, and she wasn't at all surprised, because she had heard her father tell her that I was going to be fine, even though this was late, and they were the only ones in this dead silent cafeteria. I've never told that story before, let alone to the entire world. I lived in this house from the basement, and every time I walked up the stairs I would get this weird creepy goosebumps feeling in the back of my neck. It didn't make me uneasy to go down the stairs or to be in the basement. My craft room was down there one spent a lot of time there. After all out of items I was using disappeared I would look away from it. I would search and one day I got frustrated and to no one in particular I said, "Can I please have my scissors back?" I had just looked under the pile of mail and when I turned my head, there were my scissors on top of the pile of mail. I talked to my neighbor and she told me that the original owner of the house was a jolly old man who loved to prank people, and that he had fell coming up the stairs one day and died. I think the goosebumps were him trying to tell me to be careful. And every time after that, when something would disappear, I would politely ask for it back and it would appear in a place that I could not have missed it before. Thanks, old
Need
man.
something reformed?
It was fun. I was a complete skeptic before this incident. My wife and I rented a secluded small 2-bedroom cabin in the Mount Rainier, Washington area for a hiking adventure. Upon arriving, my wife walked into the house and said there was no way she was sleeping in one of the bedrooms because there was bad energy in the room. To her defense, it was a bit creepy.
Most
Weird
appreciated.
doll dress on the wall as decoration, rickety rocking chair in the corner, and an oddly placed door that was locked but presumably lead to the attic. Once we got settled, we discovered a cabin journal with entries from past guests. There were multiple terrifying entries. My husband woke to the smell of bacon and eggs cooking. No one was awake yet. The doll dress in the bedroom is the gateway to hell. We woke last night to the sound of something walking in the attic. The locked door was unlocked and open when we woke in the morning. I called BS on all this, telling her I didn't believe any of it. We decided to sleep in the living room on the floor nonetheless and closed the door to the creepy room for the duration. The next night, after hiking all day, we were eating and drinking outside at night by the fire. A few adult beverages into the evening, I started daring her to go into the bedroom. She was freaked out and wouldn't, but I said there was nothing wrong with house, and I proceeded to go inside to take the challenge of exploring the room more at night. As I entered the hallway, my hand hit the doorknob and I turned the handle to push the door inward to enter the room. The door opened about 10 inches and stopped as it hit a chair that was propped up against the door. My mind quickly calculated the logistics of the situation. Door opens inward, room with only one entrance, chair on other side of door keeping me from entering that was somehow placed there from the inside. I let out a little girly scream, slammed the door shut and played it off to my wife that I was trying to scare her. We stayed the night and I didn't tell her the real story until the next day when we were in the car driving away. She was pissed. I was hanging out at my friend's house with her boyfriend. We were watching TV, and she had some unlit tea lights on the top of it, an old CRT TV. All of a sudden, 2 of the tea lights fly off the top and slam into opposite walls. She got up and said that's been happening a lot lately. I've posted about this before, but I'll tell it again. I'm a lover of horror/supernatural/creepy things. I spent a lot of my teens and childhood ghost hunting with my friends in random graveyards, rundown neighborhoods, abandoned factories, etc. That being said, we never really encountered anything other than psychosomatic ghosts that our overactive imagination created. Despite loving horror, I didn't really believe that any sort of corporeal ghosts were real. When I was 15, I traveled to Europe with my family. We stayed in Ettel, Germany in a small inn for a few nights. My parents had a double on the second floor. My sisters had the double bedroom next to theirs, and I was lucky enough to have a single room all to myself at the far end of the hall. When we went to check into our rooms, as soon as I entered the hallway our rooms were in, I remember almost feeling as though I walked into a wall of bad energy. I just felt so unnerved and uneasy in that hallway, but I passed it off as overactive imagination. I slept the first night without any issues other than waking up a few times. The next morning at breakfast, one of my sisters mentioned feeling really uncomfortable in the hallway, almost as if the air was crushing. It unnerved me even more that I wasn't the only one who felt weirded out, plus she was an adult at the time, so it further cemented in my head that that wing of the hotel was odd. Later that night, I'm sleeping peacefully, when at about 2 a.m., I'm woken by something ripping the covers off of me, and being jerked about 2 feet towards the end of the bed by my ankle. At first I thought someone had broken into my room, because when I turned towards what had grabbed me, a huge looming black shape was visible in the darkness, like a man was in my room. I frantically flipped the light on, only to have there be nothing there. The window was locked from the inside, there was no one in the closet, or the bathroom, and my room was also still locked from the inside. I stayed up the rest of the night scared shitless, playing Cooking Mama on my DS. Next morning, we're at breakfast and my sister mentions that she was up half the night because she thought she saw a person silhouetted against the wall of the room, but when she turned on the light there was no one there. It was just a bizarre and creepy experience. We checked out that day, so I didn't get to experience anything after that, but it still freaks me out to this day. Growing up as a Navy brat, I lived in several houses but only one was haunted. Thing was, it was brand new house. However, the land was old and had a bloody history. This was in Virginia where you could throw a stone and hit something Colonial War or Civil War or slave trade related almost every time. This brand new, ranch-style house was always cold. Even in the hot, humid summers. You could turn off the AC and it would still be cold to the point that my toes would cramp up. Lights were always flickering despite the wiring being new. Doorknobs were always being jiggled. The door that led into the garage was always shaking. Mom, who never bought the concept of the house being haunted, would say, "Oh, that's the wind going through the garage." Never mind that the garage door was almost always closed. We never parked the car in there. It was more or less used as a storage space. The rest of the doors would close themselves a few seconds after being open. Not slamming themselves, mind you, just slowly closing themselves. Thing is, they hadn't always done this. For years they stayed opened. Then one day they all seemingly decided to start closing by themselves. I always had this uneasy feeling of being watched by something. One night, whatever or whoever it was, touched me. I'm 11. Being 11 and doing things 11-year-old do, I sneaked out to the living room in the middle of the night to watch some late-night television. Like every kid who does this, I had my face inches from the screen and the volume almost down to 0. An itch began to build right between my shoulders. Almost like someone was poking me. I reached over and that's when I felt it. A hand, a man's hand. My fingers touched in between fingers and brushed knuckles. I gasped and turned around. Nothing. I turned off the television, jumped up and ran back to my room. Under the covers, I buried myself, hoping that whatever had touched me wasn't going to follow me and start poking me again. It didn't, but after that, I didn't sneak out to watch television for months and months. When I finally did, I would watch the screen for a minute and turn around to make sure no one was behind me. No way was I going to be poked by a ghost again. After my grandmother died, I'd wake up during the night, or perhaps I was still sleeping, not sure, and imagine her sitting alongside my bed in her rocking chair. It was given to me after she died. The chair that she rocked me in as a child. She talked to me as if it was real, and I'd answer back. It was always pleasant and gentle, never scary or upsetting. As I've mentioned in an earlier post, I never wanted this recurring visit, night after night. I was sad when eventually it ceased and she appeared no more, just an empty rocking chair to look at. My grandparents used to have a really beautiful painting of my aunt hanging in their living room. And yes, she is still alive. Anyways, when I was about 5 or 6, I was sleeping in their living room one night when I heard her talking to me. It was her voice and it talked to me just like she would have. It was weird because I was really calm and not scared, even talking back. But I knew the pain instead talked. Eventually she told me to go wake up my grandpa and tell him she wants to talk to him. I went and woke him up, and when he realized I was talking about the painting he got really pissed. He was yelling at me when he suddenly stopped and stared out the window. Then his eyes got wide and he told me to hide in his bedroom and tell my grandma to call the police. He then grabbed a pistol he had hidden in his cabinet and ran outside. While she was on the phone we heard 2 guns. He came back and after a few minutes and told us he shot one of the guys trying to break into the house, but they all got away. It turns out that a prison for minors about 20 miles away had 3 escapees. They ran through the woods until they came to my grandpa's property and planned on moving if they could and use us as hostages if necessary. That is until my aunt's painting woke me up and told me to wake him up. I've had 2 very unrelated experiences that I can't explain. I don't want to jump to the conclusion that it was a haunting, as I'm pretty skeptical of those things. I've simply had 2 experiences that I can't explain. One, I was about 13 or 14 in my parents' basement, just passing the time waiting for my mom to bring me to hockey practice. I was in the house alone, sprawled out on the couch, listening to a Discman. Yes, I knew. Our house had a storage room in the basement, and I was laying across from the door. Now, since I was a kid, I remember the door handle of this room would always jiggle. It used to scare the shit out of friends sleeping over. Like someone was inside, halfway turning them out to everything. I always attributed it to the fact that the furnace was in this room, and so there must be some sort of draft. Anyways, on this particular day I thought I saw something out of the corner of my eye. I turned around, and the door was wide open. It had been closed, and then abruptly closed as soon as I turned my head. Like something or someone opened it to take a look, and then God's proof that I saw it. I immediately jumped up, left the house. I just can't explain how a door opened like that, and then the moment I looked at it, it kind of slammed shut, too. Fast forward to this October. I met a mutual friend in East Glacier, Montana of all places. I won't go on about the circumstances, but we were thinking of dating and live a long ways away from each other, so met around halfway for a weekend. We got wasted at this local dive bar, and this really nice guy offered us a place to stay for free. He set us up with a room, fed us liquor. In the morning, Cole and I were talking and the room door knob made a sound. We look over. It twisted fully, the room door opened, and nothing was there. I thought I was imagining things, but the girl I was with was scared stiff and we left. I later got the guy's number and texted him about it. He said something along the lines of, "Oh, don't worry, that's just Margaret." The night of my grandfather's funeral, my brother and sister got into a huge argument. The three of us were staying at another family member's home in their living room basement. The two of them were on the air mattress on the floor and I was on the couch. I don't even remember what they were arguing about, but I do remember that it was very petty and they fell asleep while arguing with one another. I remember waking up in the middle of the night and seeing my grandfather, clear as day, standing in the doorway looking at my brother and sister and playfully/lovingly laughing at them. He was only there for like 30 seconds, then he faded away. I was the only one to see him, as the other two were asleep. My brother, sister and I were all in our mid-20s when this happened. Bold story here. I wanted to hook up with this girl. During our first time hanging out, we watched Paranormal Activity. I forgot which of us suggested it, but we thought that trying to use a Ouija board would be a cool experience. The next day, she bought one and invited me over. We tried to mess around with it and had no luck. The little plastic thing was moving, though at this point I figured it was all her messing with me. But the words it tried to spell out made no sense. Anyways, we YouTubed some videos and realized the plastic thing that came with the game didn't have a hole in the center, which is where the letter it is trying to show us would appear. We thought the tip of the plastic triangle thing is where we were supposed to look. So we decide to use a shot glass. Words start to slowly form and it tells us about some house where another spirits live, and that the owner was disturbing them by trying to get rid of it all. He gave us a phone number and this girl actually called it. At this point, I thought she was really trying to mess with me and taking this really far, but I wanted to get laid and went along with it. This went on for 3 or 4 days until I finally became a believer. She asked the board who our guardian angels were. It wrote her mother's name, who passed away at a young age for her. My turn. It wrote my grandfather's name, but she honestly had no idea who he was. He was sort of a long-lost grandfather who I had met 16 years after I was born. He passed shortly after, due to cancer, and no one in my family ever spoke about it. I thought that was weird as hell. The board also wrote my best friend's name, who passed away from suicide a few years back. Maybe she knew about this. We did have some common friends. However, it wrote his name under an alias only a handful of people knew, our gamer nicknames. Both of these names blew me away. There was no way she knew this, so how the hell could this happen? Anyways, we call it a night. The next day tells me the lights in her apartment were turned on, but I convinced her perhaps she forgot to turn them off. The next day, she texts me saying she's turned them off and is now leaving for work. We get back to her place today and they are off. She asks me to sleep over because she's sleeping. During that time, I hear what seems to be cups moving slowly in her cupboards. The toilet seat sort of slams down and later on, the shower head drops a bunch of leftover water into the bathtub, similar to when you shake it after a shower. I was pretty scared. The next morning, we use the board again and it tells us there is a new spirit around us, one that is trying to harm us. For some reason, the girl decides to ask it whether it knows when it will die. It tells me I'll die sometime in my 80s, while it tells her she's scheduled to die within the next few months. She shuts this shit down and puts the board away. Proceeds to tell me how she got raped last winter and the 2 guys who did it left her for dead, naked in the snow in a rural area. She managed to make it to a farmer's house, naked with frostbite, and called the cops. There was a court date set and friends of these 2 guys who raped her were calling her, threatening that if she testified, they'd find her and kill her. Eventually, not long after, we stopped hanging out. I end up seeing her 2 years later working at a mall. So I guess the Ouija board lied. To this day, I don't know what to think of that experience. Maybe she made part of this up, but I can't explain why a board was ever to spell my grandfather and best friend's name. The house I lived in when I was younger was haunted. In fact, the 2 houses beside were as well. These are my mom's experiences. The sound of furniture dragging upstairs while we were asleep. My parents were split but my dad used to come over. One night they were watching TV and there was a story. My dad asked what we were doing. My mom said the kids are asleep, it's the ghost. He left until we went upstairs to tell us to knock it off. We were asleep. The tap would run on its own. Eventually my mom yelled out for them to turn it off. It turned off. The basement was insanely creepy. I never went to My uncle lived with us for a few months and he'd hear footsteps all night. My black lab would piss everywhere if we tried to get her to go down there. My brother was laying in bed one night, door opened and saw 3 shadow people float into my bedroom. I never slept in my room. I always slept with my mom because the attic was in my room and it'd wake up screaming anytime I slept in there. Guess that's why my mom made friends with the neighbors. She was a Portuguese grandmother who spoke very broken English. She asked my mom one day, "Is your house haunted?" My mom never said anything about our experiences, but she asked the lady why she had asked. She then told my mom that her granddaughter was seeing things that she brushed off as her being a kid until she was in the kitchen one day and her freezer door flew open and a slab of brown meat went flying across the room, slamming against the wall. They moved out about 2 months later. Another family moved into that same house and my mom made friends with them. I never told them about the previous family. The daughter, maybe 3 years old, would sit on the stairs and watch/talk to the wall. My mom asked her mom why and the mom said the little girl talks to the shadows. There's more stories but I won't say here. On mobile, so excuse the format. Not directly, but I was with my sister and she did. At the time she was about 4 maybe 5, can't really remember, and I would have been 14 15. We were at my auntie's house, which is on a massive property in rural Tasmania. It was a really old property where people have lived and died. In the garden there was a swing. Like a really old swing that had been there forever. My sister and I were walking through the garden and my sister suddenly stopped and said to me, "Who's that little girl on the swing?" I said, "There's no one there." She said, "Yes, there is." She wasn't scared, she just thought it was a child her age on the swing. There was no one there. We returned to the house and told my auntie, and she said workers on the property had seen the little girl too. She was too young to make it up and lie about it for the sake of lying. You put it in her face, she was seeing something. I vividly remember it to this day. Not a scary experience, but strange all the same. All through college and a little while after, I worked as a nurse's aide in a nursing home. I spent most of that time in the Alzheimer's hospice and a general facility for those who were able to care for themselves. My first aid job, I worked at a particularly unsettling location in Sioux Center, Iowa. It was an old hospital that was converted to a care facility. Think of a school built in the 1950s. A lot of granite, brick, and sturdy surroundings. Just beautiful. I've read that it has since been down and replaced with a new facility. So one day a lady resident is dying. She's getting near the end and is in and out of consciousness. Just past the foot of her bed is a sink and countertop, along with her regular bathroom lines, and a small glass of water. When this resident would come to, she'd point to the end of the bed and mumble comments about how the little girl was going to knock over the glass of water, that we had to tell her to playing around because she was going to make a mess. Eventually this resident slipped into unconsciousness. The nurse, an older woman herself who had been in there for decades and had seen it all, and I are sitting there making small talk, waiting for the inevitable, when the glass of water slides off the counter. The nurse doesn't even seem to notice. I, on the other hand, a 19-year-old guy who was mildly freaked out, began to ask the nurse if she saw it too, was cut off by her saying, "Let's just focus on our patient, shall we?" I pulled myself together and tried to think about my job, but I was kind of losing. That cup was inches away from the edge of the counter and nobody was in the room with us. The resident eventually died and we did our thing. Fast forward a few hours later. The way the hallways were set up, it looked like a very big T. At the top of the T where the two halls formed a perpendicular meet was the nurse's station. That's where I had to camp out most of the evening. Everyone was in bed and had to go find before the rounds. The nurse was on another floor doing something and I was all alone. If you looked at the ceiling at the point where the two halls met, you'd see a circular mirror. It was so that you could see down all of the halls at once from the desk. Eventually my peripheral pickup movement and I looked up at the mirror. Right there, in the middle of the hall about 15 yards behind me, was the little girl. She looked about 6 with a little sundress and long brown hair. She was doing this slow, random dance that little girls sometimes do, without seeming to have a care in the world. I lost my shit. Stood up, walked around the entrance to the nurse's station while holding my hand up to the right side of my head so that I couldn't see down that hall, and bolted for the stairs. I found the nurse and told her what I saw. She laughed and admitted that over the years a lot of residents had seen the little girl and that I had nothing to worry about. It took me a couple hours to calm down, and in the next couple years I continued to work there. I never saw her again. I did see other things though and can elaborate if anyone would like. I'll see how far this comment gets buried in the comments. On a happy note, my pawpaw, basically my whole world, we were pretty much the same person. He passed away last year after a surgery left him in a coma. One night I dreamed that he sadly came to me and said, "I'm sorry I can't do it. It feels like cold metal in my lungs and I'm happy. I'm sorry." He hugged me and walked away. I was 7 months pregnant with his first great-grandchild. I woke up the next morning and my mom called. A blood clot broke loose from his lung and he had a stroke. He was never getting out of the hospital. Around the same time, I had been seeing a large golden hawk everywhere I went. Papa loved to watch hawks. The hawk always flew north when it left, but the morning Pawpaw was removed from life support, it flew south towards the hospital. I believe it was my great-grandpa going to get him because 2 days later, a second hawk appeared. He visits me in my dreams sometimes, like the week I went into labor with my son. Pawpaw was pretty well known for playing pranks to scare you. He invented the jump scare, I swear, and in one dream he did just that. I woke up mid-jump out of bed and started laughing. Pawpaw, do not try to scare me into labor. I was asleep another night and saw Pawpaw at a distance snapping his watch like we always do, and we needed to be aware of a certain time or we were running late. I woke up in labor. Last night I dreamed he came to see me and my son. He was exactly as happy and proud as I know he would be to meet his boy. He told me I was doing great, and to take care of my grandson and your mama. His birthday is Friday, so it was really nice to visit with him. On a less happy, I have seen/felt negative energy. We moved out of my brother-in-law's house. We moved in while we renovated ours. Because of the occurrences that kept taking place, I hear someone walking at me while I was alone. My husband got up with his hand down and insisted someone was in the house one night. My niece and nephew had both seen people in their windows of a house in a flood zone. The windows are about 10 feet in the air. After we left my brother-in-law and saw a bonfire in his backyard, it's about 10 acres of woods, mostly cleared near the house, at 2 or 3 in the morning. But when he went outside there was no fire and no smoke. When he walked back to the front of his house he heard a man chuckling next to the window. The kids kept seeing a face and so he went to see who it was and there was nobody there. I had felt someone grab my arm. I had heard laughter or muttering, and there were areas of the property that I refused to go to. I realized that bugs, birds, and squirrels wouldn't go there either. This past summer, my girlfriend took me to the summer camp she usually works at. It was completely empty. No rangers or guests at this Northeast Georgia camp. So we traversed the trails and she revealed the little secret paths and history that one wouldn't get to appreciate on a normal visit. History such as the visit of John Bartram and the Cherokee people who once lived here. When we were finally ready to leave, we talked a little more on the way back to the parking lot. Now, this camp has an amphitheater. Little walls extended beyond the bottom rows to sandwich visitors between it and the lake the amphitheater faces, guiding them towards the seats or away from them. And behind that wall I saw a tall black figure, with lanky limbs and no face. No face but a head with 3 protrusions that extended upward and bent down as if weighing themselves down. It was walking, a slow ponderous walk, its hands swinging past its knees. And, as if noticing my gaze, bent down and curled into a ball behind the wall, disappearing. I didn't freak, but started questioning my girlfriend insistently. "Did you see that? What was it? Is anyone here?" She managed to extract from me what I saw, of that being. And then, she told me to run. The campers who work there insist that the camp is haunted. None dare to walk alone between the buildings at night. After driving out of the camp, my girlfriend and I discussed everything I saw, some of the paranormal things that seemed to happen, the things others have seen. A house a group saw on the Google Maps in the forest, only